Think forward. Think Research Channel.
Welcome to Oregon State University's Research Frontiers. We begin with an Oregon State researcher and professor of pharmaceutical sciences who has made an impressive number of drug discoveries from marine organisms during his past 20 years of research here at Oregon State University. Bill Gerwick, thanks so much for spending time with us.
It's a pleasure.
You have become a leader in the investigation of marine organisms for their anti-cancer and therapeutic properties. Tell me a little bit about the most exciting discovery you've made.
Probably the one that I would count as our most exciting discovery is a molecule we described as curacin A. It was a unique kind of a lipid-like structure that we found from a very primitive ancient organism called Lingbia majuscula, a blue-green algae that lives in Curacao. We discovered it because of its cancer cell toxicity and went on to characterize its structure, but even more intriguing are its biological properties and the mechanism by which it's biosynthesized, that is, how it's created by the cyanobacteria. So we've studied it at a number of levels, including how this molecule interacts with tubulin, a protein polymer that organizes the separation of chromosomes at mitosis. It interferes with that process, and that's why it's toxic to cancer cells. And in the biosynthesis, we've studied in great depth how different amino acids and fatty acid components are assembled, including a characterization of the biosynthetic gene cluster, that is, the genetic elements that code for enzymes that then catalyze these reactions to assemble these components and make this really quite fascinating molecule. So it's in those various dimensions that we've been studying this molecule that I've had a great deal of fun. I and my students have had a lot of fun studying this compound.
Talk a little bit about that. Why is it important to know the genetic code of this blue-green algae?
Well, I would put this at one of the frontier elements of the field of natural products chemistry, is to come to understand how these molecules are created at the genetic level so that we might harness that genetic power for a variety of purposes. We could move those genes into another easily fermentable organism like E. coli, grow it up and have then a ready source of the compound, or we could start to tinker with those genes and manipulate them so as to make not curacin A, but a curacin A analog. And we could use the biosynthetic system to create those analogs. That is really an exciting frontier of the field of natural products chemistry.
It sounds like it. You just got back from Madagascar. Tell me what you were doing there.
Well, I was there working with the National Cancer Institute and through a program funded by the Fogarty International Center to help Malagasy scientists to start to develop their own collection program. They're already working with terrestrial plants. My focus is on marine organisms, so we were there diving, showing them some collecting techniques, photo documentation of the field, preservation of samples, extraction of these samples, largely algae, sponges, and tunicates. And then they'll be shipping those extracts to the United States, principally to Virginia Tech, which is the focal point of that particular grant, where they'll be tested for anti-cancer and other kinds of biological properties.
It sounds like you wear a lot of hats within your research. Talk a little bit about the breadth of what you do.
Well, I kind of gave a sense of that with the curacin A project, is that we're doing everything from discovery of new molecules, which includes going out and collecting the samples. So we go on a couple of expeditions per year to Madagascar or to Papua New Guinea and Curacao and other places. Isolation and discovery of these compounds, characterization of their biological properties, structure elucidation, so we use a lot of NMR and mass spectrometry to characterize these structures, and then the molecular biology to look at the genetic structure of the biosynthetic gene clusters. I also have other activities. Of course, I'm teaching in our pharmacy professional program and graduate program I'm active in the National Institutes of Health in their one of their study sections, and in several professional organizations.
You have a new study happening right now in Panama where you are working with developing countries to do this similar kind of research.
That's right. So this is the program in Madagascar I was participating in is one that I'm coming a little bit from the outside to help with. The one in Panama is one I'm a principal investigator of, and it's a very impressive program. It's called ICBG, or an International Cooperative Biodiversity Group, where it links and combines the pursuits of drug discovery with infrastructure development and training in the host country, Panama in this case, along with the conservation of biodiverse habitats and the characterization of the species in those habitats, and outreach and economic development in the host country. So I think it is a really wonderful program. I'm very happy to be participating in it.
The idea is to teach them about preservation, in a sense?
One of the strongest rationales for biodiversity preservation is, in fact, that these things have some value to us. And we're attaching value to it when we go out and explore it for its pharmaceutical or agrochemical usefulness. So this has been a very popular program in a number of different countries where there are ICBGs.
Some people may question if you can go out and mine these plant organisms and then protect the environment at the same time, but you say absolutely. Absolutely,
because the amounts that we're collecting for these kinds of pursuits are it's really quite trivial. It might be a gallon volume of plant leaves or tissue, and we can do our studies with that. But once we find that there's an active compound in there, we can, I would say, we're really in the business of developing lead molecules. That is a new chemical idea. That a plant is necessarily, or algae or a sponge is going to make an anti-cancer compound is a little bit unlikely. More likely, it's going to be the new chemical idea that we get from that natural source, and then synthetic chemists, like we have here at Oregon State University, are actively engaged in the synthesis of complex natural products and analog structures. And one of those analogs, I would think, would be a more likely drug agent. So,
let's talk a little bit about that. What is it going to take to, or what does it take to get one of these compounds to go the distance, to get it to market?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize where we sit in that, from the discovery of a new drug to a physician applying that to as a therapy to a patient. We're at the very early phase of discovery, coming up with those new chemical ideas, and then synthetic and medicinal chemists synthesizing analog structures that have more desirable properties in the human body, better absorption, elimination kinds of properties, and efficacy. And then to take that into toxicology studies in mice and ultimately in small mammals, other small mammals like dogs. Then into early clinical trials in humans, so the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. Phase 1 just looking for dose and maybe some sense of activity. Phase 2 is where activity is really observed, particularly in anti-cancer agents. And phase 3, it compares it with other agents that are in the field. So that is an enormous process, perhaps costing somewhere on the order of $700 million in today's dollars, and taking, on average, as you look at agents in the clinic today, it takes an average of about 15 years from discovery to clinical application. So some take longer and some are shorter.
How has your research grown since you got into this field? I hear you are having to turn PhD students away.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in this field, and I think for me it's the interplay of basic science and some applied issues, and we get to do some field work, and that is very attractive to students. And so my program, we have about 20 folks in my lab, about 10 students, 4 or 5 postdocs, and other research staff that assist with the projects.
Sounds like exciting research. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us today, Bill.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks
very much. Best of luck to you.
Okay.
Where will you find OSU? In nutrition labs, studying the benefits of vitamin C? Online, figuring out new ways to harness the power of the internet. In wheat fields, producing tougher strains to help Oregon farmers. At sea, finding cures for neurodegenerative diseases. Oregon State University. You'll find us working in a different kind of classroom. Where will you find OSU? On the ocean, studying tsunamis to improve warning systems. In hospitals, using robotics to aid in remote medical procedures. With children who have disabilities working on their aquatic skills. In space, studying recycling methods at zero gravity. Oregon State University. You'll find us working in ways that are out of this world.
Our next Oregon State University researcher has helped change the view that women can't do anything about osteoporosis once they reach menopause. Christine Snow is the director of the Oregon State University Bone Research Lab, and she joins us now. Christine, thanks for your time.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Your research has shown that women who do the proper exercises, even after menopause, can still build bone mass. Why is that important?
It's important because women are turning to alternative therapies now because of problems with estrogen and other medications. And so if we can build bone mass with exercise and also prevent falls, then they don't have to worry about taking a pill.
Tell me a little bit about the study. What age of women did you study and what kind of exercises did they do?
We started the study about 8 years ago, and the women were all postmenopausal, most of them not on estrogen. Most of them very active, but the intent of the project was to load their bones with weighted vests and have them do exercises in a standing position that would create more load at the hips and the spine and to build muscle.
When you think osteoporosis, you just think women, but do men also get osteoporosis?
Yes, they do. They do. It's a silent disease because you don't know it's happening. You don't know you have low bone mass. And it's really important to emphasize that you can have osteoporosis and not ever fracture. And so it's not the osteoporosis that's the problem, it's the fracture.
Hip fractures are a major problem for the elderly in the United States. Tell me a little bit about some statistics.
Hip fractures occur at the incidence of about 340,000 a year and carry an economic cost of about $9 billion. But more importantly, they have huge psychological problems associated with them. In fact, there was a study a few years ago that showed 80% of women would rather die than go to an institution as a result of a hip fracture. And so they're a huge burden, and they're only going to increase.
For the women that you've worked with to help them build their bone mass, talk a little bit about maybe their confidence over time. How has that changed? There
was a huge difference in them, in their empowerment too, to be able to do things that they hadn't done before. Like I said, they were all very active, but they weren't strong, and their balance had started to decline, and so they would talk about tripping and not falling down, being able to recover from a stumble, and also being able to hike without getting tired, to garden without getting tired. There was a dramatic change. Their husbands were making them breakfast. So it was a really fun reaction, and in addition to what happened physically to them.
A lot of elderly people who didn't grow up exercising don't really know about the benefits, or they think maybe it's too late to start to exercise. How do you change their perceptions and get them to at least begin exercising, to tell them, hey, you can actually build bone mass?
Well, one thing we do is show them the results of what we have in our older women. We also talk about studies that have been done. One in particular was a landmark study in 90-year-olds. It was by Maria Fiataroni at Tufts in Boston, and she exercised men and women in a nursing home who all were very frail. Many of them used canes and walkers, and had them lift weights at 90% of their 1 rep max, which is really high. If they could lift 50 pounds maximum, they'd do 40 pounds. And so it was a high-intensity program. She found dramatic results. She found 194% increases in strength. Most of them stopped using their walkers. And these are 90-year-olds. So if you're 90, people that are 70 and 80 can say they can do it. And they respond just phenomenally.
You've not only studied the elderly, you've studied the very young. And recently you've studied some elementary students and have learned that you can actually bank bone mass?
Right.
Tell me about that.
Right. Well, we've learned over the past 10 years that peak bone mass, that is how much you have at the end of growth before you start adulthood, is a primary risk factor for osteoporosis and for fractures later in life. And so what we've started to do is attempt to see if we can increase peak bone mass by implementing these high-impact programs in elementary schools. And in fact, we've shown that these kids after 7 months gain 5% more than the normal counterparts. So they were still growing, but they enhanced that growth.
And what did you have them do?
We had them jumping off 24-inch boxes, so 2 feet, landing with both feet on the ground, and doing that 3 times a week, 100 times each time they came to class.
What is it about that, the jumping motion and maybe the shock to the bones?
It's the delivering the force really fast. It's a surprise. It's really novel, and that's what we call it, is that the bones need to be surprised to be changed. They're different from the other systems, and it takes a lot longer to change them. And so doing this exercise over just a short period of time, 7 months, was enough in these kids and these growing skeletons to change that bone.
And will you follow these young students then to make sure that they can keep this bone mass?
Yes, and in fact, that's the most unique part of this, is that during growth in childhood, the skeleton remembers the loads that it was exposed to, and that's not true in adults. If I start a program today and next year I gain 10%, if I stop it, I'll lose it. So if you don't use it, you lose it, just like the other systems. But the skeleton is really unique in that during growth, it appears to remember and have memory for that strain.
So that's when to do that.
That's right.
Kind of exercise when you're very young. Talk a little bit about what's next for your research. What's on the horizon for the Bone Lab?
Well, what we hope to do is continue to follow these children through puberty and also follow their changes in activity to see what happens to a teenager. Why do they stop being active, so many of them, and see what we can do about changing that, about altering their nutritional habits as well.
Christine, taking what you learned from the bone mass study in elementary students, do you see that as being something that can be used in educational curriculums across the country?
Oh, definitely. And what we're working on right now is a way to vary it, but still maintain the same loads at the ground so that the skeleton gets the same amount of force, but make it more varied so it's more interesting and it can be used in a standard curriculum and thus have a health impact.
Christine, tell me why you think people should care about fighting the effects of osteoporosis.
What they should care about is not fracturing, and fracturing is caused from both low bone mass and some kind of trauma. And so with the elderly, the most important recommendation is to exercise, no matter what it is, because you're not going to build that much bone mass, but what you can do is protect yourself from falling. And 9 in 10 hip fractures occur from a fall. And so you can have osteoporosis but never fracture. And that's really key for the elderly to know, to remember.
Christine Snow, thank you very much for sharing your research with us today.
My pleasure, thanks.
Where will you find OSU? In satellite labs, tracking endangered species of whales. With families, helping at-risk parents learn to manage their challenges. In African deserts, using native plants to restore ecosystems. On volcanoes, studying the warning signs for eruptions. Oregon State University. You'll find us working in some of the hottest fields around. Where will you find OSU? In labs, developing cutting-edge cell phone technology. On treadmills, studying the effect of diet on endurance. In coffee shops, performing culturally diverse poetry readings. At sea, finding cures for neurodegenerative diseases. Oregon State University. You'll find us working in a different kind of classroom.
It is no secret that physical activity throughout life can help people avoid a host of health problems later in life. Oregon State researcher Jeff McCubbins works with people who have more obstacles than most to keeping fit, but you're trying to change that. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the Oregon State program. It's called Movement Studies and Disability. Why is it so special, and why has it gained so much national recognition?
Well, I think it's special because we've had the program here for a period of time, and it's developed and evolved over the years, trying to address the needs of people with disabilities, both children and adults, and the importance of physical activity and exercise and sport.
What makes this PhD so sought after?
Well, I guess perhaps there aren't many programs around the United States. Another thing that's very helpful to us is that we've been very successful in placing our PhD graduates around the country, and they in turn refer their good students on to us. We're currently the only one of 2 doctoral programs in the United States funded by the U.S. Department of Education, specifically to prepare doctoral level people who will then enter higher education positions around the U.S.
Talk a little bit about what role physical activity and improved physical health plays for people with disabilities.
Well, it's, I guess, no surprise to many of us that currently in the United States there's a problem as it relates to the inactivity of all of us. People are choosing to be less active, more sedentary, whether it's behind televisions or whether it's at computers or whatever. And people with disabilities are the same as others from that perspective. However, they often encounter other obstacles that limit their capacity, both in the ability to move, but also access to programs where they live and in their communities to be healthy and physically active.
Also, until recently, there really hasn't been much study on people with disabilities and their physical activity level.
Yeah, that's true. And a couple of important reports that came out in the United States, one called Healthy People 2000, talked about the need for more information about the health disparities, if you will, of populations with disabilities. Healthy People 2010 is the document that the United States is using now. Has information about people with disabilities and at least recognizes that there are more problems, more concerns, and they are more vulnerable to health problems later in life than the general population. And so in a 10-year span, there has been more evidence about the health needs of people with disabilities and the physical inactivity of people with disabilities, but yet we still don't know a great deal about that.
How did you get into this line of research?
Good question. It certainly goes back to in the early 1970s, and when I was an undergraduate and had an opportunity to actually teach some swimming classes. And I had one group of students who had mental retardation, and they were more motivated, more interested in trying than the other middle schoolers, which may not be a surprise to those that have middle school age kids. But so it became something to me that was an opportunity to do something unique that I thought was valuable.
And then where did it go from there?
Well, I went on to graduate school and then worked in a facility at the University of Virginia Medical Center in Charlottesville, and then pursued graduate work and PhD level there to focus on the role of exercise in children at that time who had neurologic impairments.
Now, I hear you've been making an impact on children with disabilities here in the Corvallis, Oregon area. Tell me what you're doing.
Well, I'd like to hope we are. We have a program on Friday evenings, which an acronym called IMPACT, which stands for Individualized Movement and Physical Activity for Children Today, and where we use students from Oregon State working with children in the community who have disabilities, and they come to OSU and participate in once a week. It's a project or a program that's funded in part by our grants and in part by our local United Way to support families and the children to be physically active. And it also serves as a wonderful opportunity for our students at OSU to learn to work with a child who has a disability.
And this started as a research project?
Well, it really started as an educational program for the OSU students and a service community for the, or service project for the community, but yet we are able to use certain elements of that program to help our graduate students identify good research questions that they're able to use that program to help answer.
And you've probably seen young people come back for many years. What kind of changes have you discovered?
Yeah, well, I've been here 16 years, and there are children in our program on Friday evening that I've seen every year. So I've watched them grow up, literally. And the parents continue to value the program. The children, I hope, develop skills in swimming and appropriate physical activity skills that they can use in physical education and in other recreation settings.
What kind of things do they do when they show up at the program?
Well, mostly the kids are involved in age-appropriate fundamental skill development activities and swimming. And so we have children who are as young as 18 months of age, so they're doing things totally different than what our 17 or 18-year-old children are doing. We utilize facilities across campus, and we get a great deal of support to make it an appropriate educational setting for the kids.
And I hear there's a one-year waiting list. So.
Well, that's a problem that we have. We have 85 children in the program now, and about 30-some on the waiting list. And that's a real challenge for us because we try not to advertise anymore because we realize it's a challenge to have families wait to get into the program, but it speaks to the success of the program.
Jeff, in the past, some people with disabilities have been encouraged not to exercise. For example, people with MS. But your research says otherwise.
Yeah, we have been involved in some research over the last 5 or 6 years in connection to a program that we have for people who have MS or multiple sclerosis. And it's an interesting disorder, if you will, in that heat and fatigue are two major problems for people to cope with. And we know when we exercise, bodies get warm and they get tired. And so trying to balance what amount of exercise is important to maintain both for physical health but also for psychological health. So yes, we have been investigating that, and we continue to work in that area.
I know especially in Oregon, it is a part of the country that has more cases of MS. Who knows why? It's still a mystery. So you would say that some exercise is good, but you have to monitor it?
Yeah, I think some exercise is good, and it should be done in conjunction with a physical therapist or physician being aware of it, but certainly such that a person with MS can participate to their levels of comfort and know that some exercise is better than none. And trying to improve the amount that they can manage on an individual basis is very important for their health.
All right, Jeff McCubbins, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. Best of luck in your research.
Thank you.